Welcome to the Rooted Healing podcast, where we seek to deepen our kinship with the living world and with the great mystery that runs through us. This is a space where stories heal with words that weave us closer to our wild and daring natures, bringing together the expansive minds, topics, and ideas that help us heal, reimagine, and co-create the world we wish to thrive in.
If a culture needs to stay stuck into domination culture, you have to demonize the wisdom of the earth and the process of descent, because, well, the culture of domination will erode very quickly if people are allowed to go into these spaces and understand the medicine that's being offered to them. So we have to make up a false story. And that's what domination culture has done. It has demonized the knowing of the snake and what that means. And so when we look back at all the mythology, we can see the hero comes in and slays the snake. And this is revered as being very, they've controlled it. They've conquered that force. And so we can't ever conquer mystery. We can't ever conquer the earth.
Jessie White is a self-taught artist and, in her words, an apprentice to the earth. She is also a part-time gardener, currently living in Salt Spring Island, the unceded territory of Coast Salish people in so-called Canada. She creates unique visionary art as a form of prayer, planting seeds of spells to bring healing to our beautiful and sacred earth. Her work, which is displayed at Seeds of Spells on Instagram, is both diverse and inclusive, portraying women in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colours to show the broad spectrum of the feminine vessel, as well as to bring us in deeper relationship to the larger earth body from which we all belong. Inspired by the eros she feels for the web of life and the ancient art of our Neolithic ancestors, as well as the understanding that art belongs to everyone, she aspires to awaken and empower others to express what the muse beckons from them, regardless of skill or training. Jessie is the artist for the Sacred Cycles Oracle deck, which is available to order starting from today. Well, it was available to pre-order, but it's officially available to order right now. I am definitely going to treat myself to this. It is a deck to connect with the ancient pulse of the earth's wisdom through your sacred cycles, moon phases, menstruation, seasons, flora and fauna, and the passage of time, to seek guidance, deepen your intuition, and honor your body's wisdom. Jessie also shares beautiful poetry alongside her art, and this episode contains some spoken pieces she has created. She has contributed some additional spoken word pieces for our patrons, which are truly so beautiful. You can become a podcast patron from £1 a month in exchange for a variety of carefully curated content to enrich your healing and explorative journey. I found this conversation deeply nourishing and moving, and we really journeyed through my favourite topics of discussion, including art as prayer, ceremony, grief tending, land as teacher, symbolism, decapitalizing art, the consciousness of water, seed sovereignty, and so much more.
How could we have forgotten the blessing to be born of a love as ancient as eternity, perpetually shape-shifting spirit, breathing you into me and back again, until I no longer know where my skin ends and yours begins. Rematriate our bones back into the land, remembering her embrace of gravity. May we begin the morning bowing to the beauty that births us. O Mother of mystery and magic, Father of fire and feather, how could we have forgotten we belong? If you don't mind, if I'd like to start with just a little intention, a prayer of intention.
Please do.
I pray that the wisdom of our more than human ken is woven through this conversation. I pray that we stay in alignment and service to life. I pray that I allow the earth to speak through me, and that we remain in alignment with that vision, and that this may be of service to that in some way.
I'd like to pray for guidance and grounding, for fluidity like the waters I am surrounded by right now, and for this conversation to really spark and ignite both of our intentions and prayers, and that these words may nourish whoever chooses to listen.
May it be so.
Thank you for starting us off with a prayer of intention like that. It's so wonderful to have you here. I have found deep inspiration and emotion in your artwork, and also the poetry that you share along with your pieces. And I'd love to hear how the lands that you've grown on and visited have influenced your creative process, and whatever else there is that inspires you that you feel called to share.
Thank you. I'll start with just speaking a bit about the land that I come from, the land that I am tethered to through my birth, as well as the lands that I've ventured to. So I'm born in so-called Kentucky of Turtle Island. I was born and raised there for a long, long time, until I was about 30. That's when I began venturing out a lot more. I first fell in love with the land there, the beautiful deciduous forest full of oaks and walnuts and sassafras and maples, and the beautiful plants, the trillium, the bloodroot. Yeah, the land there it's a very beautiful place, and I always feel a resonance of home in my body in deciduous forest. And I think we all kind of are tethered to the lands that we were born with into first. There's always that connection. And I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous folks that tended that land so lovingly. They were the Cherokee, the Shawnee, and many other groups. It was quite a diverse mixing of tribes. I ended up actually having a connection with India for a long time. Ever since 2009 was my first journey there on pilgrimage, and I visited some places and went on walking pilgrimages, and it was through a spiritual tradition that initially brought me there. I'd always felt this yearning to go on pilgrimage. I think it's something that humans have always, it's in our DNA, it's something that we've done for so long, since time immemorial. So when I began to hear about the pilgrimages, I was instantly drawn to participate. And so I ended up weaving India into my story. That's been it's fed me a lot in a lot of ways. And then I felt drawn to come back, to the West, and married my Canadian husband. And he and I are currently based in Salt Spring Island, so-called Canada, just in the Pacific Northwest, one of the Gulf Islands. And the ecology here is, it's basically like living in a sponge. It's temperate rainforest. Of course, there's droughts in the summer. You've got, with deforestation and such, there's long extended droughts and fires. There can be fires. And then you've got these really wet winters. And so I've only been here about 4 months. I'm still learning the land, all the moss and the lichen and the mushrooms and the beautiful arbutus trees, the cedars, red cedars, Douglas firs, lots of ferns, like the licorice fern, sword fern. So many of these species surround me here. So I'm apprenticing myself to the wisdom of this land. And what it has is in store for me to be here. It was quite a spontaneous move to come to Salt Spring. Yeah, I don't know if I will be here for a long while or if this will be just a little piece of my puzzle and I'll move on somewhere else. I'm not sure. So I'm kind of listening for that. And so the land is deeply woven into my art. I would say that my art was really, it wasn't until I was about 33, 34, I started to really make a daily practice of drawing every day, a little bit here and there. It was something that I'd kind of realized I had in me from time to time, but I wasn't consistent with practicing. There was a point in time, about 4 years ago, I really started to let my grief in for the world and just witnessing ecocide and genocide and the history and trauma we come from. I found that art was one of the ways that I could stay sane and let that in at the same time. It can be so overwhelming, and yet it's so crucial for us to begin to let this grief in. So I started to kind of let my hands do the thinking, so to speak, and I think that our hands kind of can lead us to places our head gets all, can often get in our way. And I think a lot of Indigenous people realize the power of our hands to kind of have a deeper sense of knowing, that sort of embodied wisdom, and that movement with our hands. And when we're not tied into analytical, intellectual thinking, our hands can unlock this potential for deep healing, for prophecy, for medicine. And so a lot of my art, comes from trying to tune into what is it that wants to be spoken through me? How can I kind of listen, learn to step aside and listen to that? And to understand that really the earth is speaking through all of us in our own unique ways, and the creative process belongs to all of us as human beings. It's a very critical part of being human. And in colonization, we kind of categorize and strip that out of people, and it's like, oh, you can't do that unless you're an expert. You can't. There's a sort of lack of permission to explore our creative visions unless you have training and expertise. And I've just found that that's actually total crap, and it's so important and necessary for every single human to listen to that thing that needs to come through them. And we are really, it's dire in this day and age. It's kind of like, it's urgent, that we can learn to listen and allow that vision to come through us, understanding we don't own it, and it's not to be capitalized, and it's a gift, and it's not fully ours in a sense. It's meant to be medicine for the collective at the time, the context of the time.
I love that. I love everything you've just shared. I love that you are apprenticing yourself to the wisdom of the land. Gosh, that resonates so deeply, and especially as someone who does move from different lands and has very vibrant different chapters, but also a deep yearning to really nest, I have found, like this apprenticeship with the land as my greatest teacher. It seems like so many of us are searching for mentors or elders or guides because we live in a society that can feel so depleted. And I just so love the notion of really learning to listen and honor the land as teacher. I know you are passionate about art, belonging to everyone, and you've mentioned transmuting your grief into your pieces. Could you go a little deeper along that thread?
Yeah, I think that I've been doing a lot of grief work lately. I took a course with Francis Weller, and he wrote a book, an incredible book I would highly recommend to everybody, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And so much of what he's offering to us is that as humans, we've lost our abilities to tap into grief and the potential medicine of it when we hold it together in community. This is a critical part of being human that we've lost touch with. And so this, I think, ties into creativity immensely, because when we sever our grief from ourselves, we also sever our vitality. We sever our greatest joys. And we sever our capacities for deep love. And grief has always been such an important wisdom to the community. From what I've learned in his course, he talks a lot about indigenous cultures and traditions that they have in regards to grieving, and how the community can hold the grief together, that this creates, it's a necessary part of creating the alchemy to build a container around the grief. And when a person goes into deep grief, they're churning something inside of themselves, and it's meant to be understood that this churning is a process that will become a medicine for the people. So it's deeply regarded and respected and revered. To be in deep grief it's essential to being a human. In one way or another, we will eventually encounter states of deep grief and fall apart in our life, and we need our community around us to hold that. And so I think in our day and age, we're trying to slowly weave these threads in what little ways we can. Of course, we can't be perfectionist about it and assume that overnight we're going to rebuild our communities and it's all going to be just like it was with our ancestors. And we have to look for the ways that we can make those little steps, and the ways that we can show up with each other and be authentic and real. For the little ways we might get out of the have a nice day, shallow culture etiquette and enter into asking the question of what ails you? What ails thee? That's a really important question. I think to hold that grief and simultaneously hold the joy of being alive, and be immensely stretched by those two states simultaneously. I think all grief is laced with joy, and all joy is laced with grief. These states don't come alone. And so, it's not a goal to sever our grief from us. It's really more of a understanding of what it's asking of us. And the creative process, it's really essential to be authentic and to be real. And I think what people receive when we're in those spaces and letting in the grief is they also can touch that inside of themselves. And we can realize that we're not touching this grief alone. We've been touching it together. And that's something that is it's immensely important to remember that when we're processing our grief. Is we're never, as much as our culture shames us and isolates grief, we're never really alone in holding it. We're all always kind of holding that together. And that's an essential part of the processing of it. If we can't be welcomed with our grief into community, then we have to cut it off and hide it and shame it. And it creates a stagnancy. We get stuck. And so much of depression and these illnesses and diseases we're facing. I think a lot of it is the grief, the unprocessed grief. And when we get out of our heads and we enter into creative spaces where we can all share and be creative and welcome each other, all of ourselves, every part of us, into a circle. That's like the medicine for processing it. And it's been immensely helpful, even though most of these, participating in these grief circles and talking about this grief has been online for me mostly. I do hope one day that I can weave it in more in my real life, but right now that's what I have, and I've been very grateful for that. It's been immensely healing to hear other humans share things, parts of themselves, strangers sharing parts of themselves, incredibly deep and intimate parts of themselves with you, to hear that and to be honored to hold that, and to just listen to each other's sorrows and grief and what we carry, and how that can bring an intimacy to us that satiates our spirits so much. So I feel very grateful for coming to apprentice myself to what my grief has to say to me. And it's an ever unfolding process. I feel like a beginner in a lot of ways. And I also feel like I've always been here at the same time. So that's an interesting paradox to hold.
Yes, our first episode was with Nikki Harrison, who has a grief apprenticeship program, which I've signed up for, and it's starting soon at the end of the month, and I'm really excited to go deeper into the art of grief tending. Thank you for guiding us through that. I really am feeling the medicine of your words already. You've spoken online about initiation from separation to interbeing, and I'm thinking about community with the human and more than human world, and how many of your pieces encompass this sensation of unity and, coming together. I'd love to hear more about this, and I'd also love to learn more about your piece, The Link in Our Prayers.
Yeah, so a lot of that language that I have developed to talk about that is Charles Eisenstein, actually. He talks about how we've been locked in the story of separation. And this is something that I think has been happening. We've been well on our way to that story for thousands of years, but it's really something culminated a few hundred years ago, and it really hit this pinnacle, the story of separation. And you can look at like the splitting of the atom as being this like epic point of taking that to the ultimate far end of this spectrum, as far as you can go. And I believe it was Thich Nhat Hanh who coined this term interbeing. And this is something I think all indigenous cultures have some way of phrasing this term, this understanding of our interbeing. And we're so lonely when we just have our human world, this separate world where everything's kind of divorced from everything else. And we look at science with its ways of categorizing and extrapolating things from context and pulling it out as a way to know it. And really, we know things deeply through relationship. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is just such a beautiful, beautiful way of understanding what can happen when we marry science with indigenous wisdom. But when things are divorced and separated, you've got, malnourished disciplines. And I think there's a really fertile thing that happens when you combine disciplines together. I'm thinking of this incredible archaeologist, archaeomythologist, Marija Gimbutas. She has been an immense mentor to me. She passed away in the 90s, but her work has left a massive imprint in the field of archaeology. She was a Lithuanian woman that grew up around people that would wake up every day and kiss the earth. And she had this rich culture around her. And so she had this upbringing, this context. And she entered the world of academia and went into, studied for years immensely and became extremely successful in the field of archaeology. She was first known for her work with these Bronze Age culture digs. And in these Bronze Age cultures, you have a lot of what we consider civilization, which is basically modern day empire. And you have a marking of a successful civilization according to how they match the criteria of what we deem as modern day empire, like weapons and domination culture. Big cities. But when she started to do these digs, she started to go a layer deeper, and she uncovered, she was always uncovering these little figurines, they called them, the goddess, and nobody was looking at them. Everybody was just, what are these? Tossing them. We don't need to study these. And she's like, but there's hundreds and hundreds of them on a site. What are these? What is this? So she beheld them in a way. And I look at that beholding something with reverence. She was the first archaeologist coming in and beholding with reverence. What are you? These figurines, what are you? And I sometimes wonder if that beholding something is when the transmission of knowledge comes, is when you're capable of tapping into a reverence for something. It reveals a deeper wisdom, like a more spiritual wisdom. And I think of mythology and all these ways that we beckon deeper layers to come to us and show themselves. And so, of course, when she started to dive into this work and uncover, these were, she called them goddesses. These were the different expressions of goddesses. And she became deeply criticized for, not having enough evidence for the conclusions she was reaching. But I think she's really the first person pioneering this deeper look at our ancient ancestors before domination culture came. What did they know and understand about the world? What was the language they were speaking in these symbols? These very simplistic symbols anybody can draw, they're not inaccessible, and they're continuous for tens of thousands of years. And this is art, this is also language. And it's this ancient, deep language that I think works on our psyche. And so I've become really fascinated with understanding art through that lens and trying to connect with the medicine of what these symbols speak. And, we often say when we think about language, and it's like a person's literate or they're illiterate. So if they can write and read the English language or whatever language, then they're literate. But I think that when we trade in other literacies, like the literacies of the land, the literacies of these beautiful pictorial symbols, it's not coming at a cost of nothing. We have to really consider when we apprentice ourselves and become literate to something, what is it that we're sacrificing? So I think of our ancestors being literate in all these ways, and how symbols are this deep language, potent language, and art is a way to try to tap into them. And they're multi-layered and they're multi-dimensional, kind of like a dream. You can hold a dream lightly, but it's going to have all these different layers to it. You can never really understand it fully. It reveals itself in the ways that you approach it. And yeah, that's been a big part of my journey with art, is to try to look at that that deep connection that we all belong to, that we all come from that understanding and that wisdom. It's written in our DNA. And as an artist, it belongs to all of us as humans. Art belongs to everybody, regardless of your skill and your training. And I feel that it's a form of colonization to tell us what art is and what it should be. And we become very, we put this perfectionist sort of disorder upon our art and put all these standards upon it. Like it can't do this and it can't do that. And it has to come from all this rigorous training and skill. And I really just want to encourage people with my art that's actually not true at all, that it's really more about showing up and being authentic and asking what wants to come through you, and showing up and being present to that is really the most important requirement to creativity. So that's been a little bit of, my personal journey with it.
Oh, you're magical. I resonate so much with everything you are sharing. Oh, you have such a gift. Have you read the book The Great Cosmic Mother by Barbara Moore and Monica Sjöö?
No, I haven't, but I'll write that down. That sounds really good.
You are going to devour this book.
All right.
The subheading is Rediscovering the Religion of the Land, and it's really a deep dive and classic exploration into the goddess throughout time and across the world. It's a somewhat controversial read, but I found it deeply inspiring. That was a beautiful journey you just led us through on symbolism, and I love how symbols do play a big role in your art. I'm thinking of the water, the serpent, spiral, and I would love for you to guide us through some of your most resonant symbols that you use.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to do is I realized I didn't address the link of our prayers. And so with this piece, I just wanted to speak briefly about, so I believe, that one's of an eldress, and she's speaking a prayer. She has her hand up, and she has this kind of rainbow hair that blends into the land. And so this is something I've often done with my pieces, is where the woman sort of, her hair is multicolored, and it blends in with the earth. And so then out from behind her, she has, behind her head, there's like these silhouettes of faces. And those are like the ancestors, but it's also like the land. So you could say like the landcestors. And so if you look, and then her mouth, she's got like a thread coming through her mouth, and then that thread's continuing through the other mouths. And then it kind of blossoms out into these symbols, like just dots and wavy lines. And, they're very simplistic symbols, but I think of like, the ancient symbols that we've been carrying since time immemorial. And these are, these are like the language I was speaking of with Marija Gimbutas, of uncovering these the language of these simplistic symbols. And so a lot of my art contains these female bodies with symbols on them. And I started drawing this not knowing exactly why I was so attracted to it. I just kind of did it. And it wasn't until later that I started to really do the research on these symbols and how we've been drawing them for so long. And I don't know, sometimes I intellectually try to grasp what it is that I do in a piece of art. And it's funny because it will speak one thing at one time, and then from another angle and another point of life, a different context, it'll reveal something else. And that's what's so fascinating about the language of art is it's very contextual and how you approach it and, the context of what you're going through. And what I love is that like people might see a piece and they point something out to me that I never would have seen. And that's always really nourishing to hear what another person sees and feels. Because I certainly don't know it all. I don't, I myself, even if I create something, I don't know, all the layers to be revealed in it. So a lot of my pieces, it's interesting because I initially started out drawing women in these very innocent kind of hands in prayer positions, bowing. And that's all well and good. That's nice as well. But then there's this something in me that was compelled to go rub up against an edge of taboo. And it's especially if you're coming from religious communities, it's kind of taboo to think of the feminine naked body, especially with, her legs spread all big bellied, and just everything we're taught is so, unchaste as a woman. And so I felt very compelled to kind of go into that territory. First, rather shyly, I would kind of enter into it a bit by bit, and then it just kind of was full bloom. Now it's to the point where, the woman's got her legs open and, it's holy, there she is and all of her nakedness. And I think that that's been so nourishing for me to rebel in that way and to just, rub up against all the taboos and put them out there, because the real thing about women is that we've been taught to be nice and good and to domesticate ourselves. And we've been rewarded to the degree to which we would comply and be a good, quiet, nice girl. And really, if you look at ancient cultures, it's all about women's sovereignty, celebrating that and that power and how dangerous that power is. It's actually, we can see the beginning of domination culture. A huge component of it is that fear of that power, of that life-generating force, that sovereignty. And so now in retrospect, I think I can start to see how my art's always been trying to move in that direction. And I was just a bit shy with it at first. And so I started gradually drawing little things like snakes and with the women. And that was something that led me on an interesting journey. I remember I had a dream of a snake. I was riding on a bicycle and I looked down at the ground and there's all these snakes, and I was like, oh, I've got to be careful, and I was sort of weaving my way through them. And they started to speak to me in powerful ways about the power of this serpentine wisdom, the wise one, and who is the snake as an archetype, and how are women connected with the snake. And so we often see in mythology with the domination culture that the snake becomes slayed, this force to tame. You think about cutting off the head of Medusa, Perseus, I believe. He was revered as this hero for cutting off her head, and she had this power to turn people to stone if you looked in her eyes. So that's really fascinating to me, to look at the monster of a story and ask, what is your story really? And revere and hold with empathy. Why do we monster these people? And I think that really in all mythology within domination culture, looking to the monsters of a story is like a portal into understanding really deeply the context of our ancestors and what's happened. So the demonization of women and the demonization of the serpent, this is a very, these are tied together strongly. And the serpent is, you think of the serpent as representing the life, death, rebirth cycles. They shed their skin, being close to the earth, their skin always in contact with the skin of the earth, this wisdom of the snake. Often the snake is represented as being a part of the underworld journey, which has also been something that's very demonized, is this descent is a process of our psyche that we enter into the darkness when we have an initiation. And so this process of if a culture needs to stay stuck into domination culture, you have to demonize the wisdom of the earth and the process of descent, because, well, the culture of domination will erode very quickly if people are allowed to go into these spaces and understand the medicine that's being offered to them. So we have to make up a false story. And that's what domination culture has done. It has demonized the knowing of the snake and what that means. And so when we look back at all the mythology, we can see the hero comes in and slays the snake. And this is revered as being very, they've controlled it. They've conquered that force. And so we can't ever conquer mystery. We can't ever conquer the earth. And so those are potent symbols. And also just simple things like the chevron. This is a very ancient symbol of our ancestors, and I often put it in my art in places of I think I might say it's like energy movement places, going this energy transfer, the up and the down and the right and the left, and just I try not to analyze it too much about why the symbol says I'm gonna be here or I try to okay, this is coming. Oftentimes I draw the sort of spirals and the labyrinth spiral as well. So these are all not my own symbols, but they're symbols that people have drawn for, thousands and thousands of years. And so I think it feels like there's this alchemy of putting my special little flavor and also carrying the ancient tradition of these symbols and kind of mixing all those together. And I think in a way it's tricky to talk about as creating art, because, there's issues of, well, we have to pay the artist. And if you're especially complicated, if you're earning money from your art, it's hard to talk about this sort of thing of where our art comes from, because it's I acknowledge it's a gift, and it's a culmination of everything I've ever been inspired by or known, and it's what wants to come through me. And so I have a right and a responsibility to honor it as such. And so there's that, tricky area with the context of the world we live in today, where you're trying to, pay your bills, live, so-called earn a living, which is an expression I absolutely hate. But we have to be practical and put prices on the art. And at the same time, I acknowledge that it's not me doing it. It's so much bigger than me. And so, yeah, that's a complex thing. And I think we all do the best we can, or most of us, we're all trying to figure out ways to interact with the diseases of our culture and still give ourselves and show up and value ourselves, not just to, if we do have worth and values, so we there could be equal exchanges amongst ourselves and our work. But yeah, I'm always inspired by like Charles Eisenstein when he talks about the gift economy. It's like there's this part of us that wants to be generous with what we have, and how do we do that in ways that feel good and like we're being valued?
Yes, that is definitely a dance I think we are all doing, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, because we have this innate joy in sharing, and yet we all are woven into the model of, earning a living. This book, The Great Cosmic Mother, talks a lot about this, and there's also Jeremy Narby's book, The Cosmic Serpent, where he threads the symbology of the serpent in creation myth from all over the world and ties it into human and plant communication, told from a very dogmatic anthropologist stance, but it's just so fascinating. And he really had a big awakening through the process of writing the book and doing the research. A big part of my journey has involved reconnecting to the symbol of the serpent for a sense of reclamation and empowerment. I wanted to share that. Would you be happy to share anything about your connection with water? I'm thinking of your piece titled With the Waters That Run Through Us. And so many of the teachings I've been immersed in have reconnected me back to the original memory of water and how sacred it is to honor the water as alive and conscious and heal our waters alongside healing ourselves. Can you share from there?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so there was this time when I started to wake up to the consciousness of water, and I was really letting in the grief of what we've done to our waters, our sacred waters, and also just in my day-to-day acknowledging the beingness of water. So even like taking a sip of water, in this process, like just offering our prayers of gratitude, but also just acknowledging the beingness and aliveness of the water that we're taking in our bodies, that has an effect. And I think of like, in spiritual practices, like in religious traditions, they'll teach you like, this is a spiritual practice, and it's like you go off on your separate reality of like meditation. And it's like, it's very like divorced from the practical day-to-day living experience. And so I think about like the act of drinking water and how this is a very spiritual act. It's practical. It's, it's essential for our survival. It's one of the most common things we do, like breathing. But it's such a strong spiritual act, and it connects us deeply to the wisdom of water. And so water, like the etymology, I know that it's traced with this word, the alphabet mem. And this is a word that it's connected with memory. So I've heard it said before that water has perfect memory. And this is something really fascinating to think about. This water that we're drinking has been around since, the dawning of days of this earth. And here we are taking in this body continuously and also full of water ourselves. By volume, I believe it's something around, 70 to 80%, depending upon the age of your body and et cetera. But by water molecule, it's like 99 point something percentage water molecules. So we are essentially water beings. And water's been deeply traumatized by colonization and exploited terribly. And so this is something that I think when I started to wake up to, there was an immense grief, but also a desire to connect. And there was a time, this was when I was living in India, when I started to really connect with the waters there. And in India, it's interesting because they do name all of their bodies of water after goddesses. So these are, there's that realization is there. It's embedded in there. And yet there's also this sort of disconnect of the essentialness of protecting the water in a practical way of not polluting the waters. So anyway, when I was there, I was having these deep connections with the water wherever I was, finding that water and going and making like a pilgrimage to the waters. And there was one in particular, it was a creek. It was up in Himachal Pradesh and the northern mountains in India. And so the water, you can still drink the water when you go up higher in elevations, just straight from the creek. So I would go there to this creek and speak to the creek and connect and drink straight from the creek, the living water coming. And, because this is important to acknowledge the structured water, the water that hasn't been taken from the environment and shoved into pipes and, treated chemically. That water has been traumatized, essentially. Its medicine can't quite be felt as much as when you interact with actual living, structured, moving water, moving through the rocks and the ecosystems, and that has a charge to it. So, that moment of connecting with the water, it was so profound, and I felt like the water had spoken to me about this realization of all waters being one water within me. The rain, the water, people use the bathroom in water, it's like it's all one body, one knowing body with perfect memory. And that was, this moment of essentially kind of falling in love with the waters. And I think when you do fall in love like that, it is immensely full of grief as well, because you're going to be aware of every way that we're dishonoring that bond, that sacred bond. And if you look at traditionally how people had relationship with waters, and oftentimes you see women being attracted to that work. It's a part of this, I think, real feminine energy. And most creation stories and their origin begin with water and, an ocean covering the earth. And so I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. It's the beginning. There's this water, and it's this life force that's kind of the start of everything, that all life is coming from. And, science would even back up that we are coming from the ocean, right? We share these characteristics with the ocean life, and we migrated to land at some point. So, these water crystals, they respond to our consciousness. And, I think that we do the best we can with, the waters. Of course, it's like we can't drink from streams that, are flowing through the land anymore. So most of us can't. And so what are the ways and practices we can honor that? And I think I don't want to get tied up in perfectionism about this, but just acknowledging that there's small little ways we can tap into that. And one way is just being present when you take in water to what you're doing, and acknowledging the beingness and honoring that, and honoring the sacredness of it. And there's little ways you can kind of spin the water and try to get it to form back into those structures, because the structured water is really what our body most recognizes as the living vitality that we need. And so I try to do that. And I think in a lot of my drawings, because there's often what we would call like the feminine running through it, that a huge part of that is the water. And so I often kind of include some element, some acknowledgement and gratitude for the waters.
Thank you so much. You're sharing so beautifully, and I just feel honored to be receiving your words in this moment. I'm listening to a few voices who are talking about these topics, and I really feel like you need to be one of those voices on a regular basis. So I hope the world has many opportunities to listen to you share.
Wow. Thank you so much for expressing that. It feels, it's definitely an area I've been venturing into lately, and I'm very timid about doing it, but it's like every bit I'm feeling called now to put myself out there in a deeper way. So it felt very serendipitous, I'll say, when you reached out and asked me, because I had been kind of, it's been a journey sharing. When I first started sharing on Instagram, it was like my palms would get sweaty and my heart would race, and I would just feel, terrified. Oh my God, I'm going to put this out there. And it was such a hard process. And then like after some time, I kind of got used to it. And now it feels like, okay, I can do that. But I'm being asked, okay, now you need to go a little deeper and actually rub up against that fear again. So this was like a really good opportunity for me to like, okay, yeah, like what's real for me right now, and like where's my fear spot? Like where am I actually rubbing up against that sort of part of me that like doesn't want to like go forward and deeper into this process?
Seeds of Spells as a name is so poignant, and I really do feel like you are planting deep prayer and a kind of magic with your art. And like you were saying, art is so contextual and depends so much on every different perspective who perceives it. You're almost creating this center of energetic exchange with a piece of art, and it is like planting a seed. And when there is so much intention and prayer and integrity woven into that, there is a spell being cast in some way. You've shared about seed sovereignty, and you're a gardener yourself. And I'm wondering if you can share a little around both the metaphor of this name, but also about seed sovereignty, perhaps referencing from For the Wild podcast, which has clearly influenced both of us deeply, and how important this is for you.
Absolutely. I love talking about this. So yeah, first I'll just share the name Seeds of Spells came out of that realization that what we speak is like a spell, and what we do with our hands and our intentions, even the word spelling, comes from this realization. So it's not like something new. It's like this is obvious. It's in the etymology of the word, that we're tapping into the potentiality that we have to co-create. And yeah, I don't want to like sort of portray it as this sort of airy-fairy, like, yes, we manifest and make reality happen, because you can see that gets like thrown into consumer society as this like how to amplify and attain more for myself and more resources and more. So it's more about how to become co-creators in harmony with life. And so when I was letting in my grief for the world, it felt so overwhelming. I had to really seek a lot of mentorship and really trust life guiding me to the people that were offering medicine for this process, because it's incredibly overwhelming. And in my past, I've had a lot of struggles with so-called mental health issues and just feeling deep, dark depressions, can't function. Luckily, I've never been consumed by really long periods of time by one of those episodes, but certainly I have felt the power of what those places can do to you, and how it's a really difficult thing when you live in a bereft culture to take in these things. So as I started to feel ready to let them in and seek mentorship, I felt, everything's coming, this wisdom is coming into my life as I'm ready to take it in. And I started to acknowledge and notice myself being led to this web of people out there that had been doing this work. And it critically in the beginning was for letting in the grief of ecocide, especially was Joanna Macy for me. She was a really just incredible voice on this, on how we can let this in and let our heart break open, and that this isn't something to run and fix, but this is like, if you're alive and paying attention, you're feeling this. This is a good, healthy reaction to ecocide. So that was, she kind of led me, and then that opened up doors to other people, and so many other people now have become these voices to help me take this in and remind me, because sometimes we're the voice and we're the ones that can give the medicine, but then sometimes we're the ones that need to be reminded. And I find that no matter how much I study and apprentice myself to these things, that there are days I get up and I just don't have it. I struggle, and I want to turn away. And, I have to tenderly hold those moments and acknowledge my humanness and my imperfections and all my inability to hold any of this alone, and acknowledge that we're not supposed to, and there's a beautiful vulnerability in the fact that we can't hold it alone. We have to be reminded by our people. And so, that's been a huge part, is acknowledging that there's that thing that's kind of leading me to these places and with these people and connecting me. And so the Seeds of Spells, as the name, came about from acknowledging that. But I'm also a gardener, and I have I like to balance, the activities that I do. I don't like to be like super dedicated to one area. I like to move my body and exercise, and I feel this balance when I can harmonize. And then I like to be outside and to connect with the earth and put my hands in the dirt and just feeling that deep intimacy and connection. And then from there, then making art from those connections. And it's kind of like all these interdisciplinary things. They feed each other, and they balance me. At least that's how I've always been, is that I need the variety to stay flowing. So that that combination of growing food and tending seeds, I've always felt this connection with seeds. A lot of indigenous people of Turtle Island, they speak about seeds in a way that's just, it's so eye-opening to the potential and the deeper elements of relationship. So in particular, I think you were talking about that episode of For the Wild with Rowen White, and she speaks so beautifully about seed rematriation. She's, I think, the first person I've heard use that term, rematriation, which I absolutely love. And that a lot of the indigenous, especially the indigenous women, they were the ones that kind of held these relationships with the seeds and tended them. And there were, they had ceremonies revolving around the seeds. And, the act, I think about the act of planting a seed, how that's also just like drinking water, the act of planting a seed. These are basic survival things, but they're also very sacred. And if we can plant their prayers back in the practical things for our survival, we're not divorcing our survival and our religion. They're deeply, our sacredness, it's deeply interwoven. So these seeds, they are interwoven in our DNA, the seeds that our ancestors, the plants that they've eaten. And with colonization, of course, especially in Turtle Island is what we know of most recently, but they've taken and stripped the people of their land and their seeds, and they lost their ceremonies around their seeds. They lost the deep, vital spiritual connections and understandings. And so the work she's doing is getting these seeds back to the people that tended them for thousands and thousands of years, the people that built ceremonies around these seeds that really deeply honored that relationship. I think about that and how, I like gardening, but I also I like to do it, in a way that's not, because there's often this pressure in farming, and I've worked on a lot of different farms, and it can be a real back-breaking sort of endeavor. You got to do it out of deep love, and it can be exhausting and long hours because, the farmers are just overworked. And so tending the land on farms, it's been very difficult to find ways to do it in places to do it that are where you're not doing it with that sort of back-breaking, let's produce sort of mentality, but you're able to do it in a way it's gentle, and you're able to kind of stop and look at the birds around you and to listen to I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm tending the land, and to sort of not approach it from that kind of rushed, like you have to produce this mindset. And I realized that, that's like a privilege, because a lot of people have to work really hard, and, they're trying to, like we said, earn a living, this term, from their work, when it's actually, if we lived in a different type of a world, then we would reward people for the way that they were building the soil, the agriculture, even the word itself, it's tending to the soil and building it and honoring it. And so, that I think people are doing, small-scale organic farmers are doing the best that they can to be practical. But I really find it juicy to get into this sort of, the ancestral wisdom of tending the seeds, and how when we reciprocate and acknowledge the spirits of the plants and the spirits of the seed, that we beckon those qualities forth to be seen by us, and we can relate with them more. So I look to these ceremonies around seeds as being ways to deepen that bond and let it be seen by us more deeply.
I met a midwife in Mexico City who told me about a seed sovereignty project with the corn, where they are reintroducing ceremony back into the culture and protecting the farmers from the pressure of working with genetically modified seeds. And it's just such needed work. Do you have anything you would like to share about ceremony and ritual, as it's another theme throughout your art and such an enriching part of the human experience?
Yeah, well, I could share just a little. I mean, I feel, like I said, it's a bit like I'm a beginner in these things, and I feel a bit like a clumsy child trying to weave ceremony and ritual into my life, But I do want to say that all of our ancestors have these ceremonies that they all have a time where the ceremony was birthed. There's always this origin point. And so even if our cultures have become bereft of ceremonies, that when we listen to the land, that's where we might start to begin the process of sort of tapping into that pulse that we feel. And because ceremony is we could look at it like it's a living entity. And so ceremony reacts according to the concepts or the context rather of the time and the place. And so it's in relationship to the environment. So, if we approach ceremony with okay, give me this outcome sort of demand of ceremony to perform something and be very dogmatic, then that's really, I don't see that being a very fertile place where we could actually tap into what ceremony has to offer. And so I think of ceremony as being something that is really, it's hard for me to define what I think of as ceremony, but I do see this critical ingredient to it, which is that sort of approaching with reverence, the mystery. And what does mystery have to say through this ceremony? And ceremonies can be so simple, I think, just using a few ingredients of the land around you, and but just enticing this third element to come through, this sort of the thing that you can't know but that you're wanting to relate with. And so a lot of religious traditions still have intact ceremony, but they have a very sort of dogmatic and prescriptive way of approaching ceremony. I don't want to say that as a general rule of, this is always the case. However, from my own observation and experience, I've noticed that it can be very routine, and then there's that stagnancy because we're not acknowledging the fluidity of the moment and how what wants to come through is very unique to that specific moment and that specific context and all the infinite relationships of that context that are interacting with it. So there's that alchemy that we can't control. And so I think that I really try to acknowledge in little ways to rebuild how I can do that listening of what it might be in that moment that needs to come through. And so I do find that there's a way we can begin this process through that listening to the land, and even through our own bodies that are like altars. Their bodies have a wisdom inside of them so ancient, and it's really not what we approach, but the way that we approach things. And so hearing that pulse, that sort of connection, and knowing when we're with that pulse, that feels like the start of how ceremony can begin. And I think oftentimes you hear from people that enter into these spaces of ceremony, there's often a lot of, I think because of the context of our day and age, there's a lot of grief, and grief often is a gateway to these spaces of authenticity because right now the context of the relationships and the way that we're interacting with our world is that is really the place to be let in. So yeah, I do honor that sort of gravity of the grief that we're in, and the places we can go through letting that in. It's like this portal into accessing that pulse.
Thank you. That was so beautifully put. I've been engaging a lot with ceremony and immersing myself into different cultures, and also in loose intuitive spaces and everything in between. And you're reminding me of how Francis Weller speaks about ritual, which is to give ourselves permission to use our imagination and look at what our intention is or what needs healing, and use the medicine that is around us. You've really spoken to something that gives us permission to rebirth ceremony in whichever culture we are in without appropriation or exclusion. You've just painted us a picture for anyone who is interested in this path of healing and connection to allow ourselves a sense of culture to be reborn. I'd love to close with anything else you'd like to share with how people can find your work and the Story Paths podcast you've started participating in, and anything you'd like to weave in with your visions and prayers to close this conversation.
I really want that people to feel when they look at my art, and I want them to tap into the parts of themselves that they have full access to create within themselves. And that, like I said, that the art belongs to everybody. So I was never trained in any methods, and, I don't have much technical skill at all, really, as an artist, earning a living from my art. It's actually, when the predator might say to me, like, you have no skill. So I think that honoring, predator has a role in our life. Predators often has just two voices, which is like, you're worthless. This is like one shape or form that predator, or like, look at you, you're too big for your britches. Who do you think you are? And so predator is very simple, and takes, predator might like try to stop us from sharing by many different words, but generally those are the two moods that predator has. So in my creative process, having an honor for predator, like, okay, you want to keep me safe, I understand, and honor that. However, you're not going to run the show here, and so I'm going to get my medicine out there, regardless of my skills. And that's been such an empowering thing for me, and I want so badly that other people also can experience that, and that no age is too old, no skill, there's no necessary level of skill to share your art and your medicine. And it's quite critical in this moment that as many people as possible can offer to the cauldron, the collective cauldron, what they have to give. And that it's more really about process over product. So it's this unfolding language that we can all participate in, and not to put too much pressure on our creations to be a certain way, and let them be weird. You look at the etymology of this word weird, and so, right, it's like prophetic, I think is a way you might say it. So it's like, let's reclaim that weird and wild thing that wants to come through us. And so that's kind of what I want to share with people. As far as my art, you can find it on Instagram at Seeds of Spells. I just recently started a Patreon where I will be kind of venturing into some different terrain as well, in addition to my art. So I've got some things planned for that. You can join for as little as like $250 US, $3 Canadian, and you get like free high-res digital files at that level, and access to the sharings there. So I'm planning on really some exciting things. My husband and I are going to be, I'm stepping into his podcast, the Story Paths podcast, for the second season, starting in February. So we've got some really exciting interviews planned, and this is definitely me branching out into new areas that are a little scary, but also very exciting for me. So I'll be doing that, participating in his podcast, and that also will be starting up a Patreon for that, where we'll be doing lots of different offerings as well. And as for its practical things, I offer commissions to people. I think everybody's been women that are mostly healers and herbalists and doing all kinds of amazing things. And I offer my service is kind of a prayer and a vision for their businesses that they're starting. And you might call them logos. That's one word. I would say that they're more like, these visions that prayers for them and their endeavors. And so I've connected with a lot of amazing people through that process. And there's an oracle deck that I just finished I finished it last winter, but it just released. And so that is Sacred Cycles Oracle. You can find the information there. And that will be released. It's out for pre-order now, but it'll be released January 18th.
Yes, I definitely plan to put an order in for your oracle deck.
Yeah, I'm actually, that was commissioned by Jill Pyle of Goddess Provisions and M of Garden of the Moon. You can find their information on Instagram. So they put the book together and did all the writings up, and they asked me to create the visions for their oracle deck. And so it was a collaboration between us three. And I was very grateful for that.
Oh, well, this has been magical, and it really feels an honor to connect with you. I'm so grateful to the internet right now. This is the power of the internet. You just share so beautifully, and I want to stay in conversation all day. But I better let you continue with your life in this moment, and I'm just very grateful to you. Thank you so, so much.
Oh, thank you. I feel so honored, and I acknowledge the alchemy of someone that is a listener and how they pull out of me these things. So thank you for that. This is my ode to the wild tenders of the edge, who are tilting the trinities back toward truth when we have lost center. This is my ode to the lifters of the veil who dare to dwell in liminality to bring forth our rite of passage. Have you been torn in two yet in the crucifixion? Has your grief resurrected into joy, a well whose waters you have brought for the thirst of our world? This is my ode to those who do not turn from suffering, but let it simmer in their spirit. You carve pathways of healing in the matrices of our mind. You plant seeds that carry the unimaginable. We often underestimate the unmeasurable, which may be most potent in matters of healing. This is my ode to those that offer their tears to the tree of life, whose shriveling roots remain despite what has been done and undone to this sacredness. To those who do not fear to eat her fruits, no matter what the knowledge will shed from us. The covenant lives in the bleeding heartbeat of boundless compassion. Belong to the longing of love. The Trinity, which is the alchemy that dances violence into forgiveness. This is my ode to those that stay true to their tune, disrupting the dysfunction of the dance around them. Sometimes rebellion is the holiest move you can make. When they said grow up, you grew down to the depths of the earth to give the strength to rise. When they said speed up, you slowed down to an urgent pause of prayer. When they said certainly, certainty is the answer you need, you held tighter to the questions of mystery. When they said shut up, you spoke louder in solidarity. This is my ode to those that paved us a path to sanctuary, a shape-shifting, ever-emptying, ever-filling fountain that cannot be calcified, quantified, capitalized, nor consumed by any one agenda. That sanctuary is a river in your veins. That sanctuary is your birthright.
If Jessie's words have resonated with you in some way, I deeply encourage you to dive into the healing resonance of her artwork, as there's such timeless language and, yes, ancestral literacy there. She's at Seeds of Spells on Instagram, and I'll be linking everything in the show notes as always, including the Oracle deck and the Story Paths podcast and any books we've mentioned. Visit rootedhealing.org to find out more about our work, and I'd also love to mention our Summer Solstice Rebirth gathering this June, because if you've enjoyed this conversation, then this intimate gathering that celebrates the rebirthing and creative ignition the summer solstice brings us will definitely speak to your soul. For more information, visit rootedhealing.org/summer solstice. You can find us on Patreon, where we are sharing all kinds of offerings in exchange for your ongoing support of this podcast, which even just £1 a month really means so much and helps cover the basic costs of running the show. I'm your host, Veronica Stanwell, and I want to thank you for being here and joining this conversation in non-linear time. I feel this connects us, and I'm so grateful.